The smell hit David first. Rot and chemical cleaners mixing together in a way that made his nose wrinkle. He stepped off the transport shuttle into Orbital Station Meridian and immediately knew something was very wrong. Trading stations weren't supposed to smell like decay. A crystalline being approached him, its body reflecting the dim emergency lighting in rainbow patterns. The creature's form shifted slightly as it moved, like living glass. "You must be the human consultant," it said, its voice chiming like wind through bottles. "I am Quilvin, station administrator. Thank you for coming on such short notice." David set down his worn duffel bag and looked around the arrival bay. Normally, these places buzzed with activity. Merchants hawking goods, travelers rushing between gates, the hum of 1,000 different species going about their business. Today, the bay sat nearly empty. A few scattered aliens huddled in corners, looking worried. "The message said something about your food systems failing," David said. "How bad is it?" Quilvin's crystalline structure dimmed. "Catastrophic. Please follow me." They walked through corridors that should have been filled with the smell of growing things. Every major station kept hydroponic farms to feed travelers and residents. David had consulted on dozens of them over the years. But here, the gardens sat dark and silent behind sealed doors. 3 months ago, a merchant ship brought in contaminated equipment, Quilvin explained. A fungus we had never encountered. It spread through our hydroponic systems before we knew what was happening. We tried everything: sterilization, genetic modification of our crops, even replacing entire sections. The fungus adapts faster than we can respond. They entered a massive bay. Rows of growing beds stretched into the distance. But instead of green plants, David saw only gray-black mold covering everything. The fungus had formed thick mats over the nutrient solutions, choking out any life. "This was Bay 3, Quilvin said quietly. "Our largest producer. We had tomatoes, leafy greens, protein-rich algae. Now we have this." David walked between the beds, examining the contamination. He pulled out a small knife and scraped off a sample, holding it up to the light. The fungus had a weird shimmer to it, almost metallic. "We have 17 days of emergency rations left," Quilvin continued. "After that, we will have to evacuate over 30,000 beings. Most will not survive the journey to the nearest station. We are too far from standard trade routes." A door hissed open and 3 more aliens entered. One looked like a large amphibian standing upright, its skin mottled green and blue. Another resembled a collection of floating spheres held together by some invisible force. The third was covered in thick fur with 6 legs and multiple eyes. "This is our science council," Quilvin said. "Chief Officer Belric, Coordinator Themis, and Medical Director Gruff." The amphibian, Belric, looked David up and down with obvious skepticism. "A dirt farmer. This is your solution, Quilvin? We need advanced mycology, genetic engineering, not some primitive plant toucher." David had heard it before. He set down his bag calmly. "Your advanced solutions worked so far?" Belric's throat sack inflated with anger. "We have tried 47 different approaches. Chemical treatments, radiation, competitive organism introduction, atmospheric modification. The fungus defeats everything within days." "Because you're fighting it with technology," David said. "Life doesn't work that way. You can't sterilize your way to health." "Explain," Quilvin said, raising a crystalline hand to silence Belric's protest. David knelt beside one of the infected beds. "You grow one crop at a time in these systems, right? All the same plant, all getting identical nutrients, all in the same environment." "Efficiency," Themis said, its spheres rotating. "Monoculture provides maximum yield per square meter. It also provides 0 resistance to disease," David replied. "One fungus finds one weakness, and it spreads everywhere because every plant is identical. In nature, nothing grows alone. Plants need diversity. They need soil, bacteria, insects, even small animals. They need an ecosystem." Gruff's multiple eyes blinked in sequence. "You want to introduce more organisms while we fight contamination? That makes no sense." "Give me one bay," David said. "One small section you've already written off." Let me show you how Earth plants grow. If it doesn't work in 1 week, you've lost nothing. If it does work, maybe we save this station." The council members looked at each other. Belric started to protest, but Quilvin cut him off. "Base 7 is scheduled for venting into space. We condemned it yesterday," the administrator said. "It is yours, human. 7 days." David picked up his bag and smiled. "I'll need soil. Real soil, not this synthetic stuff. You got any in storage?" "We have biological samples in quarantine from many worlds," Themis said. "But introducing alien soil is strictly regulated." "Then I guess we're about to break some regulations," David said. "Because if you want to save this station, we're going to need to get our hands dirty." He followed Quilvin out of the contaminated bay, already planning in his mind. Seeds from his home in Oregon. Earthworms he'd brought in stasis. Bacterial cultures that had been feeding his family's farm for 3 generations. The aliens thought of farming as something primitive, something to be engineered away into sterile efficiency. David knew different. Life supported life. Soil wasn't just dirt. It was billions of organisms working together, feeding each other, protecting each other. You couldn't fake that with chemicals and controlled environments. He had 7 days to prove that the oldest human knowledge still had value among the stars. The work was about to begin. Base 7 looked like a tomb. The walls were scorched black from the sterilization attempts. Every surface gleamed with chemical residue. The growing beds sat empty, their bottoms cracked and dry. David stood in the center of the space and breathed deep. Underneath the chemicals, he could smell metal and recycled air. No life at all. That was fine. He'd started with worse back on Earth, turning abandoned industrial sites into gardens. "This is impossible," a voice said behind him. David turned to see a moth-like alien standing in the doorway. It had 4 wings folded against its back and large compound eyes that reflected light in strange patterns. Its fuzzy body was colored in shades of gray and white. "You Belric spy?" David asked, not unkindly. "I am Ridley. I work maintenance," the alien said. "I saw you come in here with all those containers." "What are you doing?" "Farming," David said simply. He opened his first container, and the smell of rich earth filled the bay. Ridley's antennae perked up. "What is that smell?" "It is strange, but not unpleasant. Soil. Real soil from Earth." David scooped up a handful of the dark brown material. Full of life. Bacteria, fungi, tiny arthropods, organic matter from decomposed plants. This is what real growing happens in. He poured the soil into the first bed, spreading it carefully with his hands. Ridley came closer, fascinated despite obvious nervousness. "But it is so messy," Ridley said. "How do you control nutrient ratios? How do you prevent disease?" "You don't control it. You balance it," David replied. He pulled out packets of seeds. "See these? Beans, corn, squash. My ancestors called them the 3 sisters. They grow together, help each other. Corn grows tall, gives the beans something to climb. Beans pull nitrogen from the air and feed it to the soil. Squash spreads low, keeps the ground shaded and moist, prevents weeds." "But why not just grow the most productive crop in optimized conditions?" Ridley asked. David smiled. "Because productive isn't the same as sustainable. Monoculture is like running a race as fast as you can. Sure, you get somewhere quick, but you can't maintain it. This is more like walking steady. Slower maybe, but you can do it forever." Over the next hours, David worked while Ridley watched. He planted in patterns that seemed random but followed deep logic. Tomatoes next to basil. Lettuce in the shade of taller plants. Carrots and onions side by side. He introduced earthworms that immediately began tunneling through the soil, aerating it. "Those worms will eat your plants," Ridley said, concerned. "Nope. They eat dead organic matter. What they leave behind is the best fertilizer in the universe," David said. "Every living thing in this system has a job. Nothing is waste." By the end of the first day, half the beds were planted. David had rigged up a simple irrigation system using recycled water from the station. Not the purified stuff from the hydroponics, but gray water that would normally be further processed. The plants wouldn't mind. They'd filter it naturally. Ridley returned every day after that, sometimes bringing other curious station workers. By the third day, a small crowd gathered outside the observation window, watching David work. The aliens found it bizarre. David didn't wear protective equipment. He touched everything with his bare hands. He even tasted the soil occasionally, checking its composition by flavor alone. When he introduced beneficial bacteria cultures, pouring them directly onto the plants, several observers gasped. "You are putting unknown organisms into an open system," Belric said, appearing at the window on day 4. "This is madness." "It's agriculture," David replied. "And look," he pointed at the beds. Green shoots were emerging. The beans had sprouted first, their thick leaves unfurling. Tomato seedlings stood in neat rows. The squash plants were spreading their broad leaves. In just 4 days, life had returned to Base 7. Belric pressed closer to the window. "Impossible. The fungus should have attacked by now." "Check your air sensors," David said. Themis floated nearby, its spheres spinning. After a moment, it spoke. "Oxygen levels in Bay 7 have increased by 12%. Carbon dioxide down by 8%. Particulate contamination is dropping." "The plants are cleaning the air," David explained. "And the bacteria I introduced are outcompeting your fungus. Not killing it, just making it irrelevant. There's no empty niche for it to exploit." On day 6, David harvested the first crop. Radishes, fast-growing and hardy. He washed them in plain water and brought them to the observation area. He took a bite first, then offered them to the watching aliens. Quilvin accepted one, examining it with crystalline appendages. "You grew this in 6 days? Radishes are quick. The tomatoes will take longer. The beans maybe 2 weeks." David crunched into another radish. "But yeah, 6 days from seed to food." Ridley tried one, and its antennae vibrated with surprise. "It tastes alive. Our hydroponic food never tastes like this." Other aliens sampled the radishes. Word spread fast. By evening, Quilvin called an emergency council meeting. David stood before them, dirt still under his fingernails. "The results are undeniable," Themis said. "Bay 7 is not only functional, but exceeding our best hydroponic outputs for air quality and growth speed." "And the fungus?" Belric asked, still skeptical. "Present but suppressed," Themis replied. "The biodiversity creates natural resistance. As the humans said, there is no empty niche for it to dominate." Quilvin's form brightened. "We are authorizing expansion. Bays 4, 8, and 11 will be converted to natural agriculture. David, you'll train teams to replicate your methods." David nodded. "I'll need more soil, more seeds, and people willing to learn that farming isn't about control. It's about partnership with life." Ridley stepped forward. "I will learn. I want to understand this." Others volunteered too. A new kind of growth was beginning on Station Meridian. Not just plants and soil, but understanding taking root in minds that had forgotten the old ways. David smiled. 7 days ago, they'd given him a condemned bay and no hope. Now, they were giving him a chance to teach the galaxy how to grow. 3 months changed everything. What started as one experimental bay became 12 thriving gardens spread throughout Station Meridian. David barely recognized the place anymore. Walking through Bay 4 felt like stepping into a forest. Vertical gardens climbed the walls, covered in pole beans and climbing peas. Fruit trees grew in large containers, their branches already showing tiny developing apples and pears. The air hung thick with moisture and the green smell of growing things. Ridley had become David's best student. The moth-like alien moved between the plants with careful grace, checking soil moisture and harvesting ripe vegetables with gentle precision. "The tomatoes in Section 3 are ready," Ridley said, its antennae twitching happily. "And I believe we can start the first crop rotation in Bay 8 next week." "Good thinking," David said. "Remember, never plant the same thing in the same spot twice in a row. Let the soil recover." They walked together through the garden, David teaching and Ridley absorbing every word. Other aliens worked nearby. Gruff supervised the team, planting root vegetables. Themis monitored a new aquaponic system where fish waste fed plants and plants cleaned the water for the fish. The station's water situation had improved dramatically. Instead of energy-intensive filtration, natural systems handled most of the recycling. Plants transpired, creating humidity that condensed and returned as irrigation. Soil microbes broke down contaminants. The water cycled endlessly, getting cleaner with each pass. Station energy consumption dropped by 40%. Food production tripled. The fungus that nearly destroyed everything now existed as just another organism in the ecosystem, kept in check by competitors. But the biggest change was in the people. Aliens who had lived their whole lives in sterile metal environments discovered something they didn't know they needed: peace. The garden bays became gathering places. Workers spent breaks sitting among the plants. Medical Director Gruff reported stress levels dropping and sleep quality improving across the station. "There's something about being near growing things," Gruff told David one day. "My people evolved in caves, yet even we feel calmer here." "Why is that?" David shrugged. "Life recognizes life. You're biological beings living in a metal box. This reminds your bodies what home feels like." Everything seemed perfect. Then the refugee ship arrived. Quilvin called David to the command center urgently. A vessel had docked carrying 300 survivors from a dying world. Their planet, Heston 4, was experiencing complete ecological collapse. Water supplies had failed. David watched through the viewport as reptilian aliens shuffled off the ship. They moved slowly, their scales dull and cracked from dehydration. Younglings clung to adults, their eyes sunken. "We cannot feed this many additional mouths," Belric said quietly. "Our gardens are productive, but not enough for this." One of the refugees approached the council. She was older, her scales showing the gray of age. She introduced herself as Elder Shess. "We do not ask for charity," Shess said, her voice raspy. "Only passage to the nearest colony world. Our home is dead. 200,000 of our people remain in underground shelters, but they will not survive another year. We need to evacuate." "What happened to your world?" David asked. Shess turned to him. "We industrialized too quickly. Mined the minerals beneath our grasslands. The plants died, the soil blew away, the rain stopped soaking in. Our rivers dried up. Our aquifers dropped so deep we cannot reach them. We tried everything: cloud seeding, desalination, drilling deeper wells. Nothing worked. The planet rejected us." David felt something heavy settle in his chest. "Can I see your planetary surveys?" Shess provided data chips. David spent hours reviewing them with Themis. Images of Heston foreshowed a world of red dust and cracked earth. Dried riverbeds cutting through barren landscapes. Cities abandoned as the water ran out. But David saw something else. He saw potential. "The planet isn't dead," he said finally. "It's damaged, but not dead. You still get seasonal rains. You have dormant seed banks in the soil. The water table dropped, but water is still there. Your world can recover." "Impossible," Shess said. "We have the best hydrological engineers in the sector. They said recovery would take 10,000 years." "They were thinking like engineers," David replied. "What you need is a farmer." The council chamber went silent. Quilvin's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "You cannot be suggesting going to Heston 4, Belric said. "That is a planetary scale problem. You have worked with gardens, not worlds." "The principle is the same," David said. "Restore the water cycle, rebuild the soil, bring back the plants. Start small, let it spread. Life wants to grow. You just have to give it a chance." He turned to Shess. "I'll go to your world. I'll bring seeds and knowledge. Can't promise it'll work, but I promise I'll try." Shess stared at him. "Why?" "You owe us nothing. Our world is not your responsibility." "Because I know how to fix it, and you need it fixed," David said simply. "That's enough reason." Ridley stepped forward. "I will go too. I have learned from David. I can help." Others volunteered. Gruff, whose people understood underground living. Themis, who could monitor progress scientifically. Even Belric, grudgingly, offered to come and document the attempt. Within a week, they had a plan. David would take a team to Heston 4 with seeds from Earth and the station's gardens. They would attempt something nobody thought possible: planetary restoration through agriculture. Quilvin provided a ship and supplies. Station residents donated seeds they had saved from their own gardens. The refugees watched with desperate hope as David prepared. On the day of departure, Shess approached him one final time. "If this fails, you will have wasted months of your life on a dead world," she said. David shouldered his pack, filled with seeds and soil samples. "If it succeeds, 200,000 people get their home back. That's not a waste. That's everything." The ship departed, carrying a farmer and his students toward a dying world. They had one chance to bring it back to life. Landing on Heston 4 felt like descending into an oven. Heat shimmered off red, cracked earth that stretched to every horizon. Wind blew constantly, carrying stinging dust that found its way into everything. David stepped off the ship and immediately understood the scope of the disaster. This wasn't just drought. It was planetary death. Shess led them to the underground shelter where her people survived. Massive doors opened into tunnels carved deep into bedrock. The Hest had retreated underground when the surface became uninhabitable, living off stored water and recycled air. The shelter held 200,000 souls. Families crowded into small chambers. Children who had never seen the sky. Adults who remembered green fields and flowing rivers but thought they would never see them again. David met with the Council of Elders in a chamber lit by dim bioluminescent panels. Maps of Heston 4 covered the walls, showing what had been lost. Rivers that once carved through valleys. Grasslands that supported millions. Cities built around natural springs. "Show me what is left," David said. They took him to the surface in an enclosed vehicle. Through filtered windows, David watched the devastation roll past. Dried lakes showing white salt deposits. Forests reduced to bleached skeletons of dead trees. Topsoil eroded away, leaving hardpan that water could not penetrate. But David saw hope where others saw ruin. He made them stop at what had been the Shesson River, once the planet's largest waterway. The riverbed stretched 300 feet wide, cutting deep through layers of ancient stone. David climbed down into the channel. He dug with his hands through the dry surface layer until he found moisture 6 inches down. He tasted the soil and spat, then smiled. "Water is still moving underground," he said. "The aquifer is low but not gone. The river wants to flow. We just have to teach it how again." Over the next days, David surveyed the land with Ridley and Themis. They mapped seasonal rain patterns, wind directions, elevation changes. David studied old records from before the collapse, understanding how the natural water cycle had worked. "Your ancestors stripped the vegetation for agriculture and mining," David explained to the council. "Without plant roots, the soil compacted. Rain hit the hard surface and ran off instead of soaking in. The water table dropped. Rivers dried up. Wind erosion removed the topsoil. Each problem made the others worse. We know this," one elder said bitterly. "Our engineers have explained it, but the damage is done. Even if we could replant, we have no topsoil, no water to irrigate, no seed banks that survive the heat. You have me," David said, "and I brought seeds that laugh at harsh conditions." He started small. The Shesson riverbed became his laboratory. David used techniques humans had developed to restore degraded land on Earth. First, he needed to slow the water. Teams of Hest worked under his direction, digging swales along the riverbed. These were shallow ditches dug along contour lines, designed to catch and hold any rain that fell. The digging was brutal work in the heat, but the Hest were desperate enough to try anything. Next came the pioneer plants. David had brought grass seeds from Earth species that thrived in terrible conditions. Buffalo grass, tall fescue, and native Hest grasses cultivated from the few remaining seed banks deep in the shelter's archives. "These grasses are tough," David explained as they spread seeds in the swales. "They will grow with minimal water. Their roots will break up the hardpan and start rebuilding soil. When they die, they add organic matter. Each generation makes it easier for the next." He also planted nitrogen-fixing shrubs and fast-growing willow cuttings. The willows would send roots deep, seeking water. If they survived, they would be the first trees in decades. Then they waited for rain. The seasonal storms arrived 3 weeks later. Dark clouds gathered and unleashed torrents that had been running off uselessly for years. But this time the swales caught the water. Instead of rushing down the riverbed and out to sea, it pooled in the ditches. It soaked slowly into the ground. David stood in the rain, watching. Beside him, Shess and other Hest elders emerged from shelter for the first time in years to feel water on their scales. Will it work? Shess asked. Wait, David said. A week after the rain, green appeared. Tiny shoots of grass pushing through the red dust. The seeds had germinated. The swales held enough moisture for roots to establish. In patches along 5 miles of riverbed, life returned to Heston 4. The Hest could not believe it. They came in hundreds to see the grass. Some wept. Others stood silent, touching the green shoots with trembling claws. It is just grass, Shess said, but her voice shook. For now, David replied. But grass is how it starts. Grass stabilizes soil. Grass slows wind. Grass holds water. Give it time. He trained teams of Hest in what he called succession planting. Let the pioneer species prepare the ground. Once they establish, introduce more demanding plants. Shrubs, then trees, then diverse ecosystems. Don't rush. Let nature set the pace. Months passed. The grass spread beyond the original planting area, seeds carrying on the wind. The swales captured 2 more rain events. Water began pooling in the deepest parts of the riverbed instead of immediately evaporating. Then one morning, Ridley came running to David's tent. Come quickly, the moth-like alien said. David followed to the riverbed. There, in a shaded depression between 2 large rocks, water trickled. Not much, barely a stream, but it flowed. Groundwater, rising enough to break the surface for the first time in decades. Hest gathered around the tiny spring. Children were brought up from underground to see it. The first flowing water many had ever witnessed. Shess knelt beside the spring and let water run over her claws. She looked at David with eyes that held something he had not seen before. Hope. You said start small, she said. I begin to understand. David nodded. 1 seed, 1 spring, 1 section of riverbed at a time. That is how you restore a world. The real work was just beginning. 8 months transformed the Shesson River Valley. What began as 5 miles of struggling grass became 30 miles of established grassland. Shrubs dotted the landscape. Young trees, barely 3 feet tall, stood in protected swales where water collected. David walked the riverbed with a tablet, documenting every change. The grass had stabilized the soil completely. Wind erosion had stopped in the planted areas. Rain now soaked in instead of running off. The water table had risen 12 feet in the valley. Most importantly, the river flowed. Not the mighty torrent it once was, but a genuine stream ran year-round through the deepest channel. Clear water, filtered by roots and soil, moving steadily toward the distant sea. Ridley worked nearby, teaching a group of young Hest how to identify healthy soil. The moth-like alien had become an expert, able to tell at a glance what nutrients were lacking and which plants would thrive where. The second phase plantings are ready, Ridley reported. We can introduce fruit trees and deeper-rooted vegetables now that the pioneer species have prepared the ground. David nodded. Start with the areas that have had grass for at least 6 months. The soil biology should be established enough. Thousands of Hest now worked on the surface. They had emerged from underground shelters and waves, unable to resist the call of their healing world. Families claimed plots along the river, planting gardens under David's guidance. Children who had never seen green growing things now spent days tending seedlings. Shess approached with a delegation of elders. Her scales looked healthier now, hydrated and gleaming in the sunlight. David, we have found something, she said. Our historians discovered agricultural texts from before the industrial period. Our ancestors practiced methods similar to yours. We had forgotten. She showed him ancient manuscripts preserved in the shelter's archives. David studied the text, translated by Themis. The old Hest had understood crop rotation, companion planting, water harvesting. They had worked with their world, not against it. What happened? David asked. Progress, Shess said bitterly. We believe technology, meant abandoning old ways. We thought efficiency meant monoculture and chemical intervention. By the time we realized our mistake, the damage was too severe to reverse. Or so we believed. David handed back the manuscripts. These need to be taught again. Your people knew how to live here. Combine that knowledge with what I brought from Earth. Make something new that honors both. The elders agreed. Schools opened on the surface for the first time in decades. Young Hest learned agriculture alongside mathematics. They studied soil science and traditional wisdom together. A new generation grew up understanding that technology and nature were not enemies, but partners. The transformation accelerated. David introduced aquatic plants to the river. Fish from genetic archives were reintroduced, species that had been extinct in the wild for 50 years. Insects returned, drawn by flowering plants. Birds appeared, migrating from distant, surviving ecosystems to nest in the new growth. One day, David stood on a hillside overlooking the valley. Green stretched in every direction. Not the uniform green of monoculture, but the rich, varied shades of biodiversity. Grasslands, shrub thickets, young forests, cultivated gardens, and wild edges where nature decided its own path. Themis floated beside him, its spheres rotating slowly. The satellite surveys show greening spreading beyond our planting zones. Seeds are dispersing naturally. The ecosystem is beginning to self-sustain. How many rivers have been restored? David asked. 7 major waterways now flow year-round. 14 more show seasonal streams. The atmospheric data indicates rainfall is increasing. The vegetation is affecting weather patterns. David smiled. He had hoped for this. More plants meant more transpiration. More water cycling into the air. More clouds forming. More rain falling. A positive feedback loop, the opposite of the death spiral that had nearly destroyed Heston 4. Shess joined them on the hillside. She carried a small box carved from native wood, one of the first trees to mature enough for harvesting. The council wishes to thank you, she said. You saved our world. Your people saved it, David corrected. I just showed you how. You did the work. Then thank you for showing us we could. Shess opened the box. Inside lay seeds, hundreds of different varieties. These are from our gardens. Every plant you helped us grow. We have saved seeds and want you to take them. Spread them to other worlds that need hope. David accepted the box carefully. Seeds from Heston 4, proof that a dying world could come back. He thought about Station Meridian, now a thriving garden in space. He thought about other worlds he had heard of struggling with their own ecological disasters. There are so many places that need this knowledge, he said quietly. Then teach them, Shess replied. We will continue the work here. Our world will keep greening, but you're needed elsewhere. That evening, David called a meeting with his team. Ridley, Gruff, Themis, even Belric, who had documented everything with scientific precision. I'm going back to Station Meridian, David told them. But this cannot stop with one world. There are hundreds of planets facing the same crisis. They need teachers. They need people who understand that simple solutions can solve complex problems. Ridley's antennae perked up. You want to train others to do what we did here? Exactly. Create a core of people who can go to dying worlds and show them how to live again. Not as saviors, but as teachers. Each world will be different, need different approaches. But the principles are the same. Work with nature, not against it. Start small. Be patient. Let life support life. Gruff nodded slowly. I will help. My people have skills in underground farming that could help worlds with hostile surfaces. I will compile our data and create educational materials, Themis said. The galaxy needs to see this, Belric added. I will present our findings to the scientific community. David looked at Ridley. And you? The moth-like alien spread its wings. I will be the first. Teach me everything, then send me to a world that needs help. I want to give others what you gave us. Under the stars of Heston 4, green growing in valleys below, David and his students began planning something bigger than any of them. They would teach the galaxy how to grow. Station Meridian barely resembled the failing outpost David had first visited. Gardens covered every available surface. Trees grew in massive planters along the main corridors. Vines climbed walls, flowers bloomed in window boxes, and the air smelled constantly of growing things and rain. Quilvin met David at the docking bay, its crystalline form practically glowing with satisfaction. "Welcome home," the administrator said, "though you may not recognize what you left behind." David walked through transformed spaces. The original Bay 7, his first experimental garden, had become a teaching center. Dozens of aliens from different species worked the soil, learning under instructors who had trained with David. But the biggest change was the crowd. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled the station, all seeking the same thing: knowledge. They came from dying worlds, from struggling colonies, from places where technology had failed and hope ran thin. They heard about Heston 4, Quilvin explained. Word spread that a human restored a dead planet using simple agriculture. Now, they all want to learn. David met with representatives from 17 different worlds that first week. Each brought surveys and data about their specific crisis: water shortages, soil degradation, atmospheric imbalance, failed ecosystems. He could not help them all personally. There was too much need and only one of him. So David did what he did best. He taught others to teach. The Seed Carrier program began with 23 volunteers. Ridley led them, the moth-like alien now an expert in ecological restoration. They came from different species, different worlds, but shared one thing. They had all seen dead land come back to life and wanted to spread that miracle. David spent months training them, not just in farming techniques, but in patience and observation. How to read landscapes, how to understand water cycles, how to identify what a damaged ecosystem needed most, how to teach without controlling, guide without dominating. Every world is different, David told his students. You cannot just copy what worked on Heston 4 or Station Meridian. You have to listen to the land. Let it tell you what it needs. He gave each seed carrier a kit: seeds from Earth and Heston 4 and a dozen other worlds, beneficial bacteria cultures, soil testing equipment, but most importantly, knowledge. David had written everything down, created guides that could be adapted to any environment. You are not going as saviors, David emphasized. You are teachers. The people on these worlds will save themselves. You just show them how. Ridley was the first to deploy. A mining colony on the edge of explored space had contaminated their water supply. The young seed carrier departed with confidence, carrying seeds and knowledge. Others followed. Gruff went to a volcanic world where the Hest underground farming techniques could help people survive hostile surface conditions. Themis traveled to a water world where aquatic agriculture could restore dying coral reefs. Reports came back within months. Success stories from worlds David would never visit. Gardens growing in asteroid habitats. Rivers flowing again on drought-stricken colonies. Food security returning to places that had known hunger for generations. The movement grew beyond David's control, and he was glad of that. Seed carriers trained new seed carriers. Knowledge spread like seeds on the wind, taking root wherever it landed. Worlds that had viewed agriculture as primitive now saw it as sophisticated ecological engineering. The Galactic Council took notice. They established an office of ecological restoration, funded programs, created standards. Technology and nature working together at last. 1 year after returning to Station Meridian, David received a message from Earth. His home world wanted him back. Human governments had heard about his work and realized they needed the same knowledge. Centuries of industrial agriculture had degraded Earth's own ecosystems. They had been so focused on feeding billions that they had forgotten to feed the soil. David stood in Bay 7, watching a class of young aliens learn to plant their first seeds. He thought about going home, bringing his knowledge full circle back to where it started. Quilvin found him there. "You are leaving. Earth needs this too," David said. "We got so advanced we forgot the basics. Funny how that works. You will be missed, but you taught us well." The work continues. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag. Inside were seeds from Heston 4, the ones Shess had given him. "Keep these somewhere safe," he told Quilvin. Reminder that from one seed, thousands can grow. His final days on the station were filled with farewells. Students thanked him. Former skeptics like Belric admitted they had been wrong. Families brought their children to meet the human who taught the galaxy to grow. But the moment that mattered most came from Ridley. The moth-like alien presented David with a gift. A wooden box, carved from Heston 4 oak. Inside lay soil samples from 17 different worlds, each one labeled with a location and date. From every place the seed carriers have worked, Ridley explained. So you remember that the garden you planted has spread farther than you can see. David accepted the gift with hands that shook slightly. He opened each sample, smelling the earth from worlds he would never walk. Each one smelled different, each one alive with potential. Thank you, he said quietly, for learning, for teaching others, for caring. Thank you for showing us that simple does not mean primitive, Ridley replied. That patience is not weakness. That working with life instead of controlling it is not regression, but wisdom. David departed Station Meridian on a transport bound for Earth. As the station shrank in the viewport, he thought about everything that had grown from one condemned bay in 7 days. Across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds, people were planting seeds, learning to work with soil instead of against it, restoring water cycles, bringing back biodiversity, creating resilience through complexity instead of fragility through simplification. One human farmer had shown them it was possible. Now thousands carried that knowledge forward, adapting it, improving it, making it their own. David reached Earth to find his expertise needed desperately. Degraded farmland waiting for restoration, rivers needing healing, communities ready to learn. He smiled and got to work. Same principles, different world. Start small, be patient, let life support life. In his bag, he carried seeds from 17 worlds. Proof that what works in one garden can spread to thousands. The growing would never stop.